Behind only Pistoliers, Pegasus Knights are my second favorite unit in the game. There's something about just the beautiful, glittering armor of the Bretonnian Knights and the wings of the Pegasi up in the air. Very iconic for Bretonnia. And for the longest time, Pegasus Knights, at least the mid-tier ones, have been pretty good. Royal Pegasus Knights have struggled, definitely, ever since even Warhammer 2, in many ways. But today I'm going up against Red Salamander, one of my patrons, and we're going to be giving the new and improved Pegasus Knights a try. Pegasus Knights and Royal Pegasus Knights both received significant buffs in the most recent patch. Let's talk about that a little bit. They got, what, extra charge bonus, extra ground speed, I believe, a little bit extra melee defense. Royal Pegasus Knights also got some additional mass. Regular Pegasus Knights are at 1100, and the Royal Pegasus Knights we saw there in the beginning are sitting at quite a bit more, at 1400 mass. Yeah, a lot of charge bonus. The Royals have the same charge bonus now as the regular Pegasus Knights at 75, which makes them incredibly strong. And in general, the mass buff and the changes to knockdown and the changes to ground speed make them much more survivable. It's a lot easier to get charges in and get them back out. So for this build, I've got two regular Pegasus Knights, the one Royal with Lewin leading the way, some beautiful synergy possible with his Sword of Corone. We're going to quick dive on these two exposed Feral Cold ones. Red Salamander doesn't have a ton of mobility in his build to respond quickly to this. Just these two Feral Cold ones are out here on the flank, exposed. We can quickly just collapse them. So we'll keep that in the background as I go through the rest of the build. We've got new, cheaper Battle Pilgrims, mobs up front with some Peasant Archers, a couple of Pole Arms, and a Spearman with a Grail Relic to keep everything together. Damsel of Life, of course, to heal all of this expensive flying cavalry for Red Salamander's Lizardmen here. He's got Mazdamundi leading the way, two regular Kroxigors and two Sacred Kroxigors alongside plenty of Skink cohorts, two Saurus Spears, and he's also got a Feral Bastillodon for some cheap terror. Really like this build. The Sacred Kroxigors in particular are going to be very dangerous. They also got buffs in the most recent patch, of course. But anyway, you can see here that just some quick hit-and-run charges on some Skinks, and like we were able to shatter both those Feral Cold ones as well, so pretty good stuff so far. This big infantry fight is going to get underway here shortly. Of course, the armor of the Kroxigors will be pretty tough for me to get through here, as the armor piercing is not that great of the Pegasus Knights, but that's where Lewin comes in. Of course, Sword of Corone debuffs armor and melee defense, so it can be used for some great synergy, but the Kroxigors going to impact this line here very heavily. They'll trade, obviously, very well into the Battle Pilgrims. The Halberds will be a little bit better, but Red Salamander's going to go ahead and throw a Banishment down here. Should do some really nice damage to my infantry there. Didn't get the best contact. It's going to roll away a little bit there, but meanwhile, my Pegasus Knights are just kind of loitering. They are in Red Salamanders, where it's the ultimate fast response force. And because Lizardman doesn't have a lot to directly respond to them, I can very much kind of dictate where I want to go with them, with that new and improved mass and the knockdowns, right? Basically what happened, for those of you guys who don't know, infantry models that get knocked down can now take damage. Previously, that was not the case. And it was most noticeable with Footlords, especially, like cycle charging Footlords. You know, they would take very little damage overall through the engagement, especially if they're getting knocked down a lot. Here, though, you're able to get a nice isolation on this Kroxigor with the Halberds and the Royal Pegasus Knights here. Drop a quick Sword of Corone. Red Salamander's going to respond with an Overcast Net here to lock down this entire pocket and move in with the Sacred Kroxigors. Very dangerous situation for me to be in. You can see the Halberds almost immediately want to rout, but we at least did terrify away one Kroxigor. Taking a wide look at the battlefield here, no question, a lot of areas of my front line have been overpowered. Kroxigors and Skinks rushing into the back line to pressure my archers here. So the Pegasus Knights are going to need to disengage from this pocket, quickly sweep on over and try and mop up this backline pressure, see if I can't bail out at least some of these Peasant Archers, try and, you know, get some of that value to stay on the field if possible. The Pegasus Knights, though, again, ultimate fast reaction force, are able to quickly get away from that engagement, which previously I feel like they would have still had their unit models tangled up there. And, yeah, the Royal Pegasus Knights drop down here in this top line engagement, get a little rear charge on those Saurus Spears, and then quickly pull away there, but we're going to dump a regrowth into them. Of course, just overall, over the course of the battle, I'm going to be trying to heal as much as possible, especially as we get into the later stages of the battle. You'll see a lot of Earthbloods as I kind of, send the Pegasus Knights out each on their own mission and then bring them all back into the same pocket for a heal, sort of, ping-ponging around, cycle charging different various targets. Lewin is eventually able to escape that Crocscore blob up top, and, the Crocscores all being concentrated in one area is smart on the one hand. It definitely keeps, anything from getting isolated too much, but because they're away from this pressure here, we're able to drop in and eventually rout off the Crocscores and Skinks, pressuring my backline here, so hopefully I can get my peasants back on station, keep shooting in. Not that their damage is super essential here, but certainly contributing against something like Sora Spears, and just the poison from the Pox arrows also help lessen the impact of the Crocscores themselves. But a little bit of pressure here from the Skinks. They're going to decide to kind of form up with some support, which is smart, rather than trying to over-pursue. But the Pegasus Knights once again getting back up in the sky, and we're going to drop down for another big charge here. Infantry support is trying to get in, but actually ends up getting blocked, so it's pretty much just the Pegasus Knights in on this engagement with a little bit of supporting fire. But another nice net from Mazdamundi very much interrupts their charge, so I really don't get a great engagement initially. Like, if we take a look here, some of the unit models are online, but you can see others kind of dancing up in the air here as they aren't able to find space to land. But the Sword of Crone is going to be popped regardless, and a little bit of archer fire, as I said, will contribute somewhat here. We can see that poison effect. Yeah, it is hitting some of these Lizardmen units, so definitely is quite helpful. And then once the net wears off, obviously we can charge on in. There wasn't a ton to actually do damage to my units while they were netted. Like the Sora Spears and Sacred Crocscores were getting attacks on the ground, certainly, and my units here are taking fairly significant damage, but let's see if we're able to sustain. The regrouped Lizards are continuing to offer some backline pressure here. This other Crocscore regroups. They're going to keep those archers from really being able to contribute too well. So a lot of it's going to have to come down to my Pegasi, and of course continuing to heal them. A little bit of Earthblood here, a little bit of Earthblood there, and things are looking fairly solid all across the field. And yeah, just feeling fairly confident at this point, despite the fact that most of my ground troops are pretty much gone. Let's see, though. I mean, Mazdamundi, of course, is going to be healing the Sacred Crocscores, trying to sustain them through this engagement with the anti-large of the Sora Spears. It looks okay, but if we actually look here, the Sora Spears, I think, have an attack order on Lewin. The models are not really distributed out to attack the Pegasus Knights, so they haven't maybe getting as efficient damage as they could have, perhaps, there. Having an attack order on the wrong unit. But, again, just a quick sweep up in the air and back down onto a specific target. Try and concentrate unit models. I haven't really been able to highlight it too much, but hopefully you've seen throughout the course of the battle that just the Pegasus Knights tend to get caught up in those infantry models a lot less. They're able to kind of get back up in the air. The run speed in particular is one that I'd kind of forgotten about, but a lot of units, their sort of ground run speed is fairly deceptive. They might be very fast in the air, but kind of slow on the ground. That was somewhat true of Pegasus Knights, but definitely feels better now. Like, if we get in close here as they pull away, there's no interruption whatsoever, even by the somewhat heavier Saurus models. They just don't get locked down and struggle to accelerate in the same way that they used to. Definitely feels much better, and I can't really put it into quantifiable numbers per se. I mean, obviously the direct buffs is quantifiable, but just the feel of the units is hard to put a number on that, but they certainly feel better. This is a matchup where I have enjoyed Pegasus Knights over time. Certainly if the Lizardmen scale very heavily into large single-entity dinos, it can sometimes struggle a build like this, but I don't know. I feel like with Lewin's synergy here and with lots of archer support, could probably deal with more of a tall, kind of focused monster build. But anyway. Yeah, Ruination of Cities comes in. Unfortunately, mostly misses the Pegasus Knights. Doesn't really do much damage to them at all. And with most of the other targets for the Lizardmen, kind of scattered across the field here, Mazdamundi, fairly safe to just leave Lewin and the Damsel kind of tanking out Mazdamundi and the Basildon here. So we're going to send Pegasus Knights once again out across the field to finish off these various skink units and other units, kind of trying to rally to the cause here. Don't want to take any unnecessary risks, so get a nice cinematic charge here of the Pegasus Knights. And yeah, they don't really have much of a splash attack, but you notice how on that charge they were knocking unit models around, and those unit models can actually take damage now, of course. But anyway, Pegasus Knights back up into the sky, going to be sweeping on over. Man, they're just such a cool-looking unit. Like I said, so iconic for Bretonnia. Games Workshop themselves has been showing off a little bit of stuff for Bretonnia for the Old World, which has me quite excited. But yeah, they seem to do a decent job of piling in and actually getting attack animations now as well, which has been a little bit of a problem in the past. Like there on that charge, you can see quite a few of them actually connect directly with the Croc scores and are able to quite quickly start attacking and actually getting their damage out. So definitely looks like new golden age of Pegasus Knights has dawned for Bretonnia. Bretonnia in general benefited quite a bit from this most recent update, with some nice buffs to various units, especially on the upper tier of their roster. We'll talk probably about Hippogriff Knights on another day, and maybe Grail Knights as well, but for today the focus is on the winged boys, beautiful winged horses of Bretonnia. Going to be finishing off Mazdamundi's force here. That will be a GG to Red Salamander. Definitely an interesting matchup, and I do feel it's fairly dynamic and kind of go a number of different ways. A few bright spots, if we talk first about the Lizardmen, you would expect, because of the amount of healing I was able to output on high-value units, that the Lizardmen build a lot of units are going to look like they pay for themselves. That is broadly true. Of course, Sora Spears are a no-brainer here. Be very cost-effective, and that is true of these guys. The Feral Bastiladon I love for cheap terror, so even though it doesn't get raw damage paying for itself, it gets pretty close, and tactically is quite nice to have. Skink Cohorts, again, just super great as a support infantry. That speed is really nice for going after stuff like peasants. Sacred Croc scores are very good here, and we'll talk a little bit about the Cohort Waddle after this, but yeah, I would definitely recommend not only regular Sacred Croc scores, but definitely the Cohort Waddle as well. The regular Croc scores, not so much. I mean, the anti-infantry bonus is nice, but it's not super applicable in this matchup, and I think you're better off with that 1,000 cost to probably just straight up switch these guys out for Cold One Spear Riders. Red Salamander, of course, is my patron. Yeah, just in terms of further analysis here, yeah, I mean, I like the pick on the one hand for the armor, but again, I think just the Cold One Spear Riders are going to be better. They do also benefit from the knockdown changes somewhat, so looking at my team, though, my side, all the Pegasus Knights performed how I wanted them to. We were able to keep them on the field and sustained, which was nice. Yeah, they had some pretty serious threats to go after. The Sacred Croc scores are legitimately scary now, so I'm pretty happy with how they were able to do against them. The rest of my build kind of just gets ground pounded. I mean, there's a few bright spots like the Holy Wardens there holding out for quite some time, doing some very solid damage. One of the Halberds also gets some okay damage. You know, a few of the peasant mobs are reasonably cost effective, but for the most part, all the value gets carried by Lewin and the Pegasi, which is pretty much how I wanted it to be, so that's fantastic. But just to kind of finalize discussions, again, since Red Salamander is one of my patrons, I'll offer up this piece of advice to him and to all of you. For the Lizardmen, I do think that Sacred Croc score is going to be really nice in this matchup. In particular, the Cohort of Waddle now has this dazed contact effect, which reduces melee defense and speed, both of which are going to be super applicable to like Pegasus Knights, for example, right? When you stack that on with Poison, obviously Poison giving 15% speed debuff, right? So you can stack those two on Pegasus Knights to significantly debuff their speed, try and lock them down. Royal Pegasus Knights only have 36 melee defense, goes down to 32 for the regular Pegasus Knights, rather. So if you can reduce that by 10, putting it down to, you know, 26 or 22, that is low enough that even, like, skinks can get pretty good hits, especially with the amount of unit models they have. In general, Lizardmen has fairly low melee attack as a faction. Like, just broadly, their units don't have the best melee attack. They generally have pretty good weapon strength, especially for Saurus, though. So, any kind of melee defense debuff or melee attack buff tends to be really strong for them. And the Cohort of Waddle, I think, with that day's contact effect, would definitely fall into that. They're fairly expensive, so be tricky to make work. You'd have to kind of change around some things in the build, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Definitely some learning on both sides, some bright spots, but personally loving where Pegasus Knights are at. How are you guys feeling about the patch? Let me know in the comments below. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.